I'm gonna wait for a few people to come in. I'm gonna wait a few more minutes and before I start. Yeah, got a total of 5 people watching. Hey guys, how you doing? Okay, let me go ahead. Let me get started. So we're at 3 minutes. Let me get started. Okay, so first, let's turn the music down a little bit. Great. So this discussion is going to be on the mesolimbic pathway. The reward pathway. It's a very important circuit for you to sort of understand because this is the nerve bundle that's targeted in substance abuse. Overactivity of this network makes you feel good. Underactivity, you don't feel so well. And so this mesolimbic system is a heavily dopaminergic innervated nerve structure. A lot of dopamine receptors. And it's the dopamine receptors that's the target for the drugs of abuse, cocaine, amphetamines, things like ecstasy, and I'm not sure it's PCP or LSD, but I haven't reviewed those in a while. But yeah, the main substances, cocaine, all those, target dopamine, and it targets dopamine release in this mesolimbic nervous system, the mesolimbic system, and the hyperactivity in that mesolimbic system, it gives you all the highs. First, let me just show you where this mesolimbic system is. I used this diagram yesterday. Remember the mesocortical pathway? Remember this one right here from the ventral tegmental area out through the prefrontal cortex and over here to the frontal lobe. And so look how long this look at the route of this. It goes to a lot of very important areas. I think it assembles, gathers the information at this point, and then this is a thought or perceptual assembly mechanism as it goes on from structure to structure, processing information. And I think you're able to really engage with the world like a very mature adult when the information is processed through this entire circuit. Not, you know, as soon as the information get to this point, you act at this point. I think, you want to process it all the way through to access this executive functioning that exists in your frontal lobe. So we went through this mesocortical pathway. It's a major contributor of the positive and psychotic symptoms of schizophrenia and also in autism when this thing is injured. But today we're going to talk about the mesolimbic system right here, right? And substantia nigra, because this is innervated with a lot of dopaminergic neurons. And so when you stain them in methylene blue, they stain up very dark, just like in the basal ganglia, and like Parkinson's, dementia, you don't get as much methylene blue in the stains. So hyperactivity of this nerve bundle creates the symptoms of the intoxication, and hypoactivity means they're like withdrawing, right? So let me look at the symptoms of a hyperactive mesolimbic system. So that's how it looks like when it's hyperactive. Oh, see, positive symptoms, schizophrenia right there, hallucination, delusions. Okay, we got this. Okay, got this from the mesocortical. Okay, a hyperactive mesolimbic system, okay, often associated with conditions like schizophrenia because that's mesocortical pathway is dopaminergic, is highly dopaminergic innervated anyway. So if it increases dopamine, it's going to increase that network. But I think that's different from the mesolimbic system. I think they're merging the two here. So here we get down to the mesolimbic system, primarily related to reward processing, motivation, and psychosis. Okay, the psychosis, that leads us to the mesocortical pathway. So just focus on this reward and reward processing and motivation. Okay, these include, the psychosis, they go back to so let's stay away from that. Let me see here. Okay, positive symptoms schizophrenia. Okay, here's this mesolimbic in the brain involves a VTA and this AI is fusing all these things. Okay, so positive symptoms of schizophrenia. Okay, let's focus on here, reward and motivation. The mesolimbic system plays a crucial role in motivation and reward processing. It's been a while since I looked at the studies on this, so I'm not sure how accurate I am, but I recall going to a study and the researcher presenting her data, and I think her data suggested that patients with certain types of predilections to cocaine dependency issues may have hypoactive mesolimbic pathways, and that may be set by the genes, the hypoactive. And so at a baseline, they may feel amotivated, they may feel decreased interest, not as much joy or positive emotions. And sometimes I hear the patients say, hey, when I took the cocaine, it made me feel normal. So I ran across a book. Can't find it now, but it was really interesting. The person who wrote the book stated that he believes that people use substances to eliminate the suffering that's associated with the hypoactivity in these networks. So they're just trying to modulate the networks to a place that's reasonable for themselves. So I've heard that in my patients. And overactive symptoms can lead to heightened motivation. Yep. Reward activities, potentially continuing to addictive activities. This reminds me of, and like football in the 80s, there was a linebacker called Lawrence Green. I think it's Lawrence Green. Let me see if I can show y'all this guy. Well, anyway, I can't find this guy. Apparently, there's a lot of Lawrence Green linebackers. What did he play for? Anyway, back then, there were a lot of rumors about the professional football players using cocaine when they were playing. And I heard an argument between younger, current professional athletes and the ones that are in the 80s. So these are two different categories. All of them in the 80s were using cocaine when they were on the line. They're using cocaine for the increased motivation and things like that. The drawback to it is the potential for addictive behaviors. Okay, so that's positive symptoms. Let me see if I can hypoactive. That's probably not the right question. Let me see symptoms of, let's say, dopamine hypoactivity. Let me see the symptoms. Mesolimbic hyperactivity. I can't see it here, but it actually, it's the opposite of this. Decreased drive, decreased motivation, and sleeping a lot, fatigue, tired, withdrawn, compulsive, not doing anything, mood swings, just simply irritable. So in this mesocortical pathway, the cocaine causes the release of dopamine from the presynaptic neuron. And it's a flood of release of these neurotransmitters until it's basically pooped out, right? When it pooped out, the party's done. When you use up all the presynaptic dopamine, then eventually the nerve cells become hypoactive. The whole network becomes hypoactive. And that's when we see them in the hospital when they're going through cocaine withdrawals. And if you ever seen someone go through cocaine withdrawals and try to take a history, it's almost useless. They can't even lift their head up out of the ground, let alone think about complicated questions or anything like that. So usually when they come into the hospital on their day number one, I usually give them some time to sleep and because it's usually too much for them to actually give a history. Great. So that's dopamine hypoactivity. Let me look at the receptors on the mesolimbic system. See what receptors are there. We know dopamine receptors are going to be there. All right. Look at here, look at here, look at here. Dopamine receptors. There are D1 and D2 right there. And these are two main categories, right? And there are other receptors. You have, I think D1 through D1 and 5 are activating, and 3, 4 is inhibitory, something like that. But there is a difference between them. Dopamine receptors, which are activated by dopamine, a neurotransmitter crucial for motivation, reward, and reinforcement. Well, that's in the mesolimbic system. Additionally, the mesolimbic system involves, here we are, glutamate receptors and opioid receptors. Remember, yin and yang, there's only two major neurotransmitters throughout all of the tissues. One is glutamate, excitatory. One is GABA, inhibitory. Glutamate turns it on, GABA turns it off. And here we have glutamate receptors located on this mesolimbic system. So that means that when you have excessive glutaminergic activity, then it can really lead to, you can see a situation like mania or hypomania, where you have elevated self-esteem, increased interest, increased motivation, just alert, restless, difficulty sleeping, just having difficulty shutting the thinking off. And you can see how this sort of like turning with this glutamate, sort of turning the volume up more with this glutamate receptor. And so how now you can see how sensitive this, how sensitive your perception of your goals, your interests, your motivation, and all those stuff can be influenced by glutamate. This glutamate neurotransmitter, because it's everywhere. So I think it's very important. And opioid receptors, among others, which contribute to the system, diverse functioning. Okay, great. Right. So we have our dopamine receptors, because in dopaminergic hyperactivity, and in hyperactivities, we need to block that receptor. Hold on a second. I'm sorry. Can you give me a call back in like 5 minutes? Okay. Okay. Next. Okay. Glutamate receptors. NMDA receptors. Yep. I don't, know too much about this one. Okay. Let me just skip over that. Oh yeah. NMDA. Now, remember in the elderly, not only in the elderly, but remember I use Aricept and also Namenda to help get access to that glutaminergic system, to try to decrease that glutaminergic activity through that acetylcholine muscarinic network, and also by using Namenda to decrease the activity of NMDA. And ecstasy is so dangerous because it activates NMDA and activate the glutaminergic system. And we see a lot of damage that occurs to these networks when patients come in using ecstasy. It can result in this hyperstimulation that eventually lead to the brain cells dying. It's sort of like a process that I look at it like riding till the wheels fall off, something like that. So in patients with these methamphetamines, ecstasy, NMDA, cocaine, all of these can result in excessive stimulation of nerve cells and eventually result in brain cell death. When that brain cell dies, then you have other problems. How are you going to clean that stuff up? And how's the other electrical materials going to work in the midst of a dead cell? So you get an immune response to sort of clean that area up and sort of respond to it. And then in order to get the immune response, you have to open up the blood-brain barrier. You have to make the blood-brain barrier more porous. And when you make the blood-brain barrier more porous, you cause another problem. It's contamination. A lot of things get into the CNS at that localized area that's not supposed to be there. And it causes a lot of problems, So once it gets to that point, then the patients who are on too much of this stuff, they can start presenting disoriented and restless and confused, and it becomes more like a delirium. And that's when you start to hear the description. When law enforcement shows up, they're described as superhuman, have a supernatural strength, increasingly motivated, increased interest, agitated, restless, on 10, So this is a real problem, and it's very important to sort of understand these receptors. Okay, receptor profile. And so you can see the primary tool here would be the antipsychotics. If the person is taking cocaine and they're just fluorescent, psychotic and agitated and just everything, then you're gonna have to use the major, typical antipsychotics, possibly IM or IV, to block those pathways to decrease the hyperactivity. Okay, so let me see here. So let me see if I can answer any questions. Okay, so let me see the first question. Let me see. Is the Okay. Is the Mesolimbic system also responsible for love and attachment? I think so. I think this is the reward and motivation, and most important, reinforcement. I think this is the Pavlov's dog sort of like presentation, is positive intermittent reinforcement. and things like that. You have a positive experience, you get a spike in dopamine, right? And you remember that, and your body remembers that. You remember it consciously and consciously and unconsciously, and your body remembers it. If you keep having those experiences, then it'll associate. You'll get the increase in dopamine whenever you go into the environment or whenever you get around the person, right? And this is the problem with that, because the patients who use cocaine may have a baseline of feeling dysphoria, and then when they take the cocaine, they feel normal, but they feel normal about the people who are other users, and so they may get attached to that as normal. So when they leave that place and no longer at the place where they're attached to, they may go back to the dysphoric state, and they may not be able to lift that dysphoria until they go back to the places they were using or back to the people they were around. And when they go back to those people, their nervous system starts to produce the dopamine, and it give them the delusional belief that everything is okay. When it's really just your nervous system just running a circuit, and you believe everything your nervous system saying. So I think that yes. Okay, next question. Can overstimulation of the Mesolimbic system lead to plateaued response in the brain reward system over time? Absolutely. It's called tolerance. And it may have more to do with the chloride or ion receptors in close proximity to the G proteins that is connected to. And at least in the case of, I'm not sure, it's the degree of depolarization in the chloride channel that results in the degree of intoxication. And the G protein the chloride channel in close proximity to the G protein may be less sensitive to its interaction, and so the person would have to use the substance longer or use more of the substance to get the same degree of depolarization across those chloride channels. Now, it's been a while since I read this, so I don't know if it applies to all of the different. I think it applies to alcohol, but I don't know if it applies to all of them. Maybe a different receptor, but I think that's the mechanism of tolerance that happens right there. Exactly. Next question. Dr. Reed, I've heard that cocaine messes with the brain reward system. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Amongst other things. Can you explain in simple terms how the mesolimbic pathway makes people get addicted to it so fast? It's the conditional learning. It's a conditional response and everything. You're around people who are using substances or places where they use them, and you use the substance. You start to secrete dopamine. You get all the benefits of it, and you attach that to the benefit to the situation. So if you keep doing it over time, your body is going to produce the same physiological effects whenever you get into the environment. And when it does that, you feel like you're at home. It's a torturous, if you think about how torturous that is, it seems your body leads you back to the same situation that got you ensnared in the first place. And when you try to leave the situation, you have to always expect that your ego will turn against you, because you're going to constantly feel dysphoric, because you're not going to find any other place that makes you spontaneously feel the way you were when you're back there using. So I mentioned this early in the rounds today, that some of these objects that you encounter, like cocaine, ecstasy, it may take 5 decades for you to be able to separate yourself from these objects, because the magnetic pull is so strong. You can't resist these things by yourself. Let me see. Next question. Okay. Okay, here. How does the mesolimbic pathway work with the prefrontal cortex and affect impulse control and reward processing with ADHD? Let me show you the diagram here. And I think you'll be able to see what I'm talking about here. Let's go back to this diagram here. Yep. Okay, how does a Mesolimbic pathway work with the prefrontal cortex? Okay, this is the inside surface, but this area around here would be the prefrontal cortex here. The prefrontal cortex is very difficult to see where it begins or ends. The best way to map it out is to use an electronic probe and to sort of probe it. And this is the area that's not, if you probe it, it doesn't result in any type of movement activity. So this prefrontal cortex, if you spoke, it doesn't result in movement activity. So I think it's just processing perceptual experiences, things like that. That's the mesocortical pathway, right? So with the prefrontal cortex and how it affects impulse control. As you see, the bundle goes all the way up here to these regions that would be considered the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is the seat of your executive functioning. And the executive function is what controls your impulses. Okay? So with the appropriate executive functioning, you should be able to suppress your impulses. Right? Now, people with executive functioning difficulties, like those with frontal lobe damages, simply have difficulty suppressing their impulses. And so we simply call them like impulse control disorders, attention deficit disorder, like intermittent explosive disorder, things like that. Okay, next, can trauma or childhood, okay, let me see here. Can trauma or childhood neglect alter the system permanently? Absolutely. In the developmental disabilities, the networks simply don't form as well. They don't mature as well. That can be because of the design genetically, or it can be because of something interfere with the process, like infections, prenatal infections, substance use, illnesses, things like that, trauma, and things like that. So it could. So the answer is yes. Yes, if it doesn't develop to its the point where it's functional, then you have a network with tracks that are underdeveloped, and so the whole network can only function at the level of that tract, because all the information that passes, the majority of the information that passes through that system, I would think would be lost because it's not developed enough to handle all the information. Next question, Dr. Reed, how does the limbic system relate to dopamine reward? It's the system that gives you the reward. More dopamine, hyperactivity, more rewards. Hyperactivity, less rewards. All right. Here, Doc, why do people feel so depressed and empty after taking ecstasy? The dopamine is released from the presynaptic neuron and is stored in vesicles. It causes the release of it, and when all of it's gone, the party's over. Everything shuts down. Now you hypoactive. Now you withdrawn. Now you can't move. Now you don't have any interest. Now you don't have any motivation. You lay there. Cocaine is in ecstasy. These are very, 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 very dangerous drugs. You should never use these. Very dangerous, because it leaves the person disabled for a day or so. And they need to be in the hospital because they're not able to take care of themselves and things. And these are people who need to be watched very closely. In this time, they're very vulnerable to abuse, to medical problems, everything. Okay. Let me see here. Doc, why do people feel so depressed and empty after ecstasy? Because it releases everything, it uses everything up. Now the system's hypoactive. Is that because the Mesolimbic system gets drained and damaged somehow? It gets drained because you deplete the dopamine and neuroreceptors, right? And it takes a while for that bundle, that storage, to build back up, and the system sort of reset itself. And damage, of course, because that overexcitation causes that overexcitation of glutamate. Glutamate excitation destroys the cells. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much. We'll explain. Thanks, Doc. What's the difference between D1 and 2 receptors and D1 and D2 receptors? Not much difference. I think they're all are activating, and I think 2, 3, and 4 are inhibitory. But check me up on that. Um, Okay, great lecture. Okay, it's 30 minutes. I wanted to try to keep this at 20 minutes because I know the students don't want to stay around that long. Okay, so if there's not any more questions, then I'll go ahead. I'm going to in the next hour at 1 o'clock, I'm going to start my series on narcissists. And basically, it's going to be narcissism is a network. It's not an individual. So at 1 o'clock, I'll start my series on narcissism, and I'm going to go into a real deep dive at the molecular level and also at the sort of spiritual level of what's happening with these animals. So stay tuned at 1 o'clock, and if you want me to manage your mesolimbic pathway, I'll be doing direct admits to the hospital. So you can just get in touch with my team, and then we'll see if we can contact each other. Thank you so much, guys. I'll talk to you later. And my other stream is going to start at 1 on what you call. So be there. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Ciao, guys.